Okay, you got it?
I do.
Excellent. All right, so I put this question first because Orthodox and Hasidic Judaism is a form of Orthodox Judaism.
Okay.
They used to be pretty different in terms of ways of observance, but they're pretty similar today. Because they are a minority. They are the fundamentalists of the Jewish community. The largest branch of Judaism is the Reform branch, Reform Judaism. No ED on the end, just REFORM.
Okay.
And it's the most liberal. The conservative movement is next in size, and it's a little less liberal, but in terms of social action, it's very liberal. And then conservative, Orthodox and Hasidic Judaism is on the far right, the most fundamentalists. There is a branch of Orthodoxy called Modern Orthodox, which is not really fundamentalist in the same way. They are very careful in their observance of the laws, but they're not crazy people. They separate, they wear masks, they, do all the sensible things they're supposed to do. So it's on a continuum from most liberal to most conservative with a little c. And the three main movements are Reform as the most liberal, conservative in between, and Orthodox on the right. So you will find that in the current political spectrum, it's the Orthodox and Hasidic Jews who are voting Republican, not all of them, but many of them. And the Reform and the conservative Jews, the majority, are voting Democratic. So it's like fundamentalists on all ranges. And I hope I'm not being offensive at all.
No, would you say that fundamentalism is pretty similar no matter the religion itself?
I think so, yeah.
That's kind of just one of those interesting things is that I've noticed throughout the news and other events, it just seems like, no matter what they call their religion or how they look at God, it always seems like they're more alike than they are different when we get to the very extreme fundamentalist.
Except when you get to the laws, and I'll give, what's a hot topic right now, and that's abortion. According to Jewish law, which the ultra-Orthodox follow to the letter, if a mother's life is at risk, the mother's life takes precedence over the child's life.
Okay.
A child is not considered a person actually until they're born. And traditionally, you would not have a funeral for a child who lives less than 30 days.
No kidding.
And that's because when these laws were being adapted and adopted, infant mortality was so high that you would be constantly mourning, because we do, when we bury somebody, we have traditionally a week's worth of mourning where we are home and people come and visit us and services are in the home and everything. And then the whole month is still considered a mourning time. And we say prayers of mourning for 11 months. So if they had funerals and this mourning process for every infant that died, say in the 17 and 1800s and earlier, you would be, the community would be in mourning the whole time.
I imagine.
So it made a lot of sense. Then most people don't follow it anymore. Although I do have a friend who had a child would be probably now in their early 50s. So about 50 some years ago, the child died. I don't know if it was born dead or died shortly after birth. And they buried the child. The mother wasn't there. And there was no period of mourning. And I know it was a problem for my friend for many years, for not having the opportunity to mourn and to have closure. So
entirely understandable.
yeah, so that's the most fundamentalist group. There's this body of Jewish law called Halakha. Orthodox and all Orthodox Jews, modern and ultra-Orthodox, consider themselves totally bound by halakha. Then there's Reform Judaism on the more liberal side. I'm not going to say left, but if you think of a continuum in your mind, it would be on the left side of the continuum. That says that we should know what halakha says, but we're not bound by it.
Okay.
And then there's the conservative movement that says we're bound by halakha, we're bound by the law, but it's permissible to change certain things. Example, Orthodox Jews do not drive on the Sabbath or on any holy days. Conservative, when in the 1950s, everybody was moving out into the suburbs, post-war, and the synagogues were moving out to the suburbs, conservative Jews found that it was too far for their congregants conservative leaders found it was too far for their congregants to walk. So they said, you can drive on the Sabbath or holidays, but only to synagogue and home again.
Okay.
Okay, so that's an example. Reform has always driven, because it's not like you're making a horse work anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So if you were to draw a continuum for your students, you would have Reform on the left, conservative in the middle, and then Orthodoxy on the right. And Orthodoxy is still the smallest group. In Israel, they wield a lot of power because they have political parties that support right-wing prime ministers. But they don't wield a lot of power in the Jewish community in this country.
Okay.
Okay. So what are my thoughts? Any questions about that?
Not so far.
Okay, please ask anything. As I tell my students, there's no such thing as a stupid question.
All right.
Okay, all right. What are your thoughts about how your religion is represented in movies and television? Well, since your students probably thought that Orthodox and Hasidic Judaism was the main part of the community, I would say I'm not very happy about it. I don't think we've been represented very well for the most part. There are some exceptions. I'm not a big television person. I'm mostly public television and British programs. So
Okay.
I have Acorn and BritBox, and watch very little except public television, although we got a new setup in our community here. So I have cable again. I did not miss it when I didn't have it. So I've been watching Rachel Maddow, but it makes me too anxious. So
Oh yeah, I know the feeling.
yeah. I don't like this. What's the show that's on Maisel?
Okay.
Maisel, is that it? And let me get my phone and turn it off. All right. I stopped watching it because I didn't like the way she treated her children.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I know she was funny and she worked hard to get to where she got. I watched a few episodes. I just got upset that she pawned her children off on her parents, who were obviously not really capable of taking care of very active young children, to have her dream come true. I think there has to be, I think if you're going to work like that, you have to get somebody responsible in your home to take care of your children.
Okay.
What can I say? My daughter-in-law is a professor at KU, and an associate dean. So, and my son works for public radio. And so they both have very stressful jobs.
Oh, I imagine.
Yeah. I don't know if you're a classical music fan, but my son just started a new classical music station here.
Oh, yeah.
You are?
I am.
Okay, well, you can get it either if you have a smart speaker or online at Classical 91.9 Classical KC.
Okay. I'll make
Yeah,
note of that.
Yeah, so he just started that. He's directing it. So there's and he still has responsibilities at KCUR. So but they managed to make sure the kids get good care. And so I know what it's like, but that's
Yeah.
why I didn't continue watching that show.
How about
I
like Mel
have not
Brooks?
watched Unorthodox. I've read some books written by people in similar situations. Maybe I ought to speak a little bit about the role of women in, assume you have women students.
Most of my students, almost, gosh, I'm trying to think, maybe 80% of them in this class are female.
Okay. So the Reform movement was the first movement to ordain women as rabbis.
Okay.
Conservative criticized us for doing it, and then 12 years later, they started to ordain women as rabbis. Reform is the most progressive in those areas, and conservative criticizes, and then they follow us. What can I say? And modern Orthodox has a small school that ordains women as rabbis, but the bulk of Orthodoxy does not.
Okay.
And Orthodoxy, modern and ultra Orthodox, have separate seating for men and women in services.
Okay.
And the men are not allowed to hear the voice of women. It's called Kol Isha, the voice of a woman. Conservative and Reform don't have those hangups.
Okay.
We have mixed seating, everybody sings together. A lot of the musicians, whether ordained as cantors or non-professional leaders, are women. So, and at this point, there's probably well over 1,000 Reform women rabbis, I think. So, yeah.
Okay.
How
about
pardon?
how about something like Fiddler on the Roof?
Oh, Fiddler is a story. It's a Sholem Aleichem story. It was accurate in terms of, a blessing for the Tsar, keep him far away from us. Jews tried not to draw attention to themselves. Intermarriage was terrible, as you may remember. Life was very rough in the shtetl that was this small town that was portrayed.
Okay.
Especially, there was something called the Pale of the Settlement. Well, actually, what Fiddler portrays is how difficult life was for Jews wherever we lived. I'm not talking about this country, although there has been a striking rise in anti-Semitism in the
Yes.
country, and I'm really worried what's going to happen after the election. Whoever wins. Actually, I have a webinar on that sometime next week, I think. We always lived at the government of a place would let us live there, and there were usually restrictions. A lot of times you couldn't own land, you couldn't join guilds, which was the way people learned certain things. You couldn't become professionals. You couldn't attend universities, depending on the country. With the Enlightenment, Western Europe became a little more accessible. But then there was the 1848 reactionary revolutions, where a lot of the things that had been gained during the Enlightenment for Jews and other minorities it was a step backwards. And I would say today, Jews pretty much have the same rights as everybody else, but there's a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism all over the world today. But in earlier times, and of course the apex of this was the Holocaust.
Right.
Jews were treated horribly. And that started in Germany among civilized people, the nation of Beethoven, Brahms, and Bach, right?
Yeah, they never thought it would get that far.
Pardon?
Oh, yeah, it was just nobody ever believed something like that would happen or could happen.
That's right.
Until
Yeah.
it did.
And it did. They were Germans first and Jews second. And they never believed. You know, I fought in the First World War, they said. I have a medal from it. Didn't matter.
No.
And so by the time some people got out, people with money got out. By out anti-Semitism, because I think that's a real important thing. A lot of people are not aware of anti-Semitism. An astounding high percentage of people in this country, especially young people, don't know about the Holocaust. And I think it's really important for people to know, only so that it doesn't happen again to any people. Let's move on. Okay. So I don't know how well I answered question 2. But I don't think, on the whole, I would say it's iffy. Okay. I don't think you can really portray any religion well when you're going for entertainment.
Okay.
I think Fiddler was representative of how people lived. But a lot of people didn't live even that well, especially in what was called the Pale of Settlement. And people who didn't leave Europe or Russia or the Pale of Settlement, which was parts of Poland, parts of Russia, was the only place that Jews in the Russian Empire were allowed to live. And under the Soviet system were allowed to live. You had to have a permit to live in a city elsewhere. And there were lots of, there and in Poland, there were lots of murders by Cossacks, what we call pogroms. It was very bad. And I think Schindler's List, which would be an important movie for people to see.
Right.
Gives you some idea of what happened to people during the Holocaust. Okay, why do members of the Jewish faith wear the yarmulke? Well, I'm not wearing one now because I'm not leading services or teaching. I guess I am teaching, but it's worn by Orthodox men all the time, by some, by rabbis of all across the whole spectrum, some all the time and some just when we're leading services.
Okay.
It's meant as a sign of respect to God. We cover our heads in the presence of God. That's the message. That's the but the historical thing really is that when in Europe, when people went into churches, they would take their hats off. So the Jews decided we would keep our hats on in synagogues, and the more modern synagogues.
Okay.
The keeping the hats on evolved into wearing the yarmulke. Now, the Hebrew term for that is a kippah, Kippah.
Okay.
And I prefer that people know that term. Yeah, so that's why.
Okay.
What is our most important belief? I'm going to do that in three.
Okay.
Okay. There's only one God. And the Messiah has not yet come. But when the Messiah comes, the Messiah will be a human being.
Okay.
Not a God. And the Messiah will not come until we make the world a better place. It's our obligation to create a better world for the Messiah to come, with a world without war, where there are nobody is hungry, where people are taken care of, no hatred. It's our obligation to build that world. So that's the one God, and the Messiah. Number two, we function as a community. There are certain prayers that are said only when there are 10 or more people, and in Orthodoxy, 10 or more men. In Reform and Conservative, women are counted in what's called a minyan, or a group of 10.
Okay.
We have a lot of home practices, but community is a very important value. And the third one would be, let's see, that we all belong to the people Israel, not the state of Israel, but the people Israel, which has existed since biblical times, because Jacob, I don't know how well you know your Old Testament, what we call the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible.
Oh, fairly well.
Okay, so Jacob, after he had the struggle with the man who was neither human nor divine, before he meets his brother Esau, and he has his hip wrenched, he is given a new name then. He's given the name Israel, or Yisrael. And all of us are descended from Jacob's sons.
Okay.
He had 12 sons, and we're all descended from them. And so we are the people Israel. And so there was the ancient land of Israel, and there's the modern land of Israel, but there's also the people Israel, which covers Jews everywhere. And
Okay.
we are all part of this larger group. If I could teach people one specific, wow, good thing I poured more coffee. One specific thing in regards to your religion, what will you teach them? I would teach them that we are all responsible for one another. If we save one life, it's as if we save the world. If we destroy one life, it's as if we destroyed the world. And because within we are all created in the image of God. So within each of us, there is that divine spark, and it's our job to look for that spark in everyone we meet and to help raise people up from difficult places. So you will, and it all goes under the rubric of social action.
Okay.
There's a verse in Leviticus, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. And it's not, and why is justice mentioned twice? There's a commentary that says because we have to pursue justice in just ways.
Okay.
And it's and the word tirdof, which is translated as pursue, really means to chase after it. In other words, you really have to be active in pursuing justice for all peoples. And I think that's a really important thing to know, especially in today's atmosphere.
And would you think that this is what kind of puts the Jewish faith a little bit more on the progressive spectrum when it comes to like women as rabbis or just social justice in general?
Yes, I think it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't just sit around and take care of yourself. You're obligated, not just to the Jewish community, but to the larger community. You will find that a lot of Jewish organizations serve a lot of non-Jewish people. In Kansas City, Jewish Vocational Services is one of the 3 major services for resettlement of immigrants.
Oh, wow.
And Jewish Family Services, which has a whole bunch of programs, serves a lot of people who are not Jewish. The majority of people probably are not Jewish in some of their areas. And we have 2 food pantries, and some of the people who come to them are Jewish, and most of them are not.
Okay.
So that's not unusual. And we've been very active in the civil rights movement. A lot of our people marched with Martin Luther King. A lot of our people were in Selma and got wounded and got jailed. We really are very involved still in those movements.
And would you be willing, or would you say like Bernie Sanders would be a good representation?
Bernie Sanders is too left-wing for me.
Okay.
Bernie Sanders isn't a practicing Jew, and I don't know if he ever has been. I don't think he identifies as Jewish. He may identify as Jewish, but I wouldn't see him as a good representative of Judaism.
Okay.
But some other people might. I see Joe Biden as a better representative of Judaism because I think Joe really cares about all people. And that's really interesting because he's a devout Catholic.
Yeah.
But he is a social action person.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
okay. Afterlife. So different. We have many different views of the afterlife. Some people believe that in like the Christian afterlife, you go to heaven, you're reunited with everybody. And, some people believe that, whether on a really deep level or on a surface level. But I would say for liberal Judaism, and I would include conservative in this, and maybe some Orthodox, people live on in our memories. And we keep people alive by talking about them, by remembering them. We every year on the anniversary of someone's death, we light what's called a Yahrzeit candle. Yahrzeit is a German word for 1 year.
Okay.
Each time But we do it every anniversary. So my father's been gone now 26 years, and every year on the day that he died, I light a candle.
Okay.
And we also have 4 services a year in which they're called memorial services, in which we remember people who have died. So that sometimes I was a clinical social worker before I became a rabbi.
Oh, okay.
And I had clients who would worry that they would forget someone who died. And in Judaism, there's no chance you're going to forget this person, because you have 5 times a year when you're going to remember them. So memory is very important.
Okay.
And I would say that we believe that the body goes back to the earth from which it comes, which is why we do not cremate.
Okay.
We do, I'm sorry, some Jews do cremate,
Right.
but we do not embalm.
Oh, okay.
And we do not have open caskets. We don't have visitation beforehand. We have what's called Shiva afterwards, where people go to the home of the deceased to offer condolences.
Okay.
We encourage regular burial, but Reform Judaism, Reform rabbis will do funerals for people who have been cremated. But then we encourage burying the cremains, not having them sit on your mantle or bookcase.
Right.
And so if I would say that the most popular, the strongest belief is that the soul lives on. At the end of days, we talk about that every soul will come before God and will be judged. But most of us don't accent that, because we live, and here's the real difference. We put emphasis on what happens in this life. We don't do certain things to gain a place in the afterlife. We do things under the rubric of social action, of kindness to people, of observing whatever laws we observe, to make the world a better place, and because we are commanded in our scripture to act in certain ways, which means that we don't put an emphasis on doing things because of the afterlife.
Okay.
Okay. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think that covers it pretty well.
Yeah. What is it that keeps me involved with my religion? Well, I'm a rabbi. It's, kind of what I do. It's not just what I do, it's who I am.
Okay.
I love to study and learning. We talk about, you keep on learning. As kids, you learn what we call pediatric Judaism, but you need to keep on learning as an adult. And so I love to learn. One of the beauties of this pandemic for me has been that there are not a lot of learning opportunities in the Kansas City area. Most of them are on the East Coast, and probably most of them New York City.
Right.
And I've been able to take a lot of webinars because everything's being offered online now. And I've been able to do a lot of learning myself, which has been such a treat for me. And also I teach, I'm very part-time in St. Joe. I usually, in better times, I go up once a month, and we have services on Friday night, and then I lead a study on Saturday morning. We've been having, since the end of March, we've been having services twice a month, actually every other week. Now we are doing services on the second Friday of the month, and we're doing study on the fourth Friday of the month. And we had our first study last Friday, and it was just wonderful. I love teaching. And I love seeing people get excited about, about Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess when you talk about previously you were a social worker, do you
Right.
find that there's a lot of overlap in your work as a rabbi as well?
Well, I will say that somebody once asked me, do I ever use my social work skills as a rabbi? And my response was every day in every way. Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if there's overlap. If there's skills that are really important to have. One of the rabbis I became friendly with in New York when I was writing my thesis, who's head of a healing center in New York. He said he's a rabbi and a social worker, and he said he thought every rabbi should have social work training because you need to know how people work. Yeah, it's very helpful.
So I guess the same thing when it comes to learning. I know the Jewish tradition puts a real emphasis on kind of discussion and debate.
Right.
Do you find that enjoyable as well?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because when I work with people who are converting to Judaism, they are very surprised that there are different interpretations of things and that they're encouraged to question. That, as I say to people, you only learn by asking questions, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. It took me until I went to social work school 16 years after I graduated from college. And in college, I was afraid of asking questions. I was very much a wallflower in high school and college. By the time I got to social work school, I had more confidence and I would ask questions and people would come up to me afterwards and would say, I'm so glad you asked that question. And you only learn if you ask questions. And I wish more people would do that. And I encourage everybody I teach to ask questions. So yes, we are a questioning religion. We do argue with each other over things in a healthy way. There are many different interpretations of the biblical text. And I think that's one of the beauties of Judaism. Also, a lot of anti-Semitism is based on, well, Jews do so well and Jews have more money. And some of that is true. And one of the reasons for that is because we've always had this emphasis on education, not just on religious education, but on secular education. So that you will find that for a long time, more Jews, well, certainly Jews go to college way out of the percentages that we're less than 2% of the population in this country. And we have graduate education in larger numbers. And so if you have that emphasis on education and people achieve in those ways, they are going to have more money. I mean, it's just because they're going to get paid more unless they go into higher education. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, trust me.
Yeah, it's kind of like now Italians place a lot of emphasis on education, but they place emphasis on family first, whereas Jews will do a real sacrifice. Will sacrifice a lot for their kids to get an education.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I heard one time there was I don't know if this came from the Torah, but there was a story about three rabbis who were debating scripture. And then I guess God came down to tell them what the actual interpretation. And I think the story went that they told God to like not intervene because they were the ones to interpret things on earth.
Right. Yeah, we have a very kind of casual, personal relationship with God.
I got kind of a chuckle out of that story.
Yeah. Because God gave us the law and left it up to us to interpret it. And so there have been centuries of interpretation. And that story took place probably in the maybe 14th, 15th century, maybe 13th century, unless it's in the Talmud. Might be the Talmud.
Okay.
I don't know the timing of it, but they were arguing over something, and God said, the interpretation goes the way of Rabbi so and so, and they said, God, don't interfere. We've got this, and that's okay. We interpret. God does not sit up on a throne dictating what we do, and God is not a punitive God. God, when we do something wrong, God wants us to repent for it and move on. But in repenting, we have to apologize to the person we've hurt. We can't just say, if I hurt you, I'm sorry. We have to say, I said such and such, or I did such and such. I hope you can forgive me for it.
Okay.
And then God will forgive us. So it's a pretty demanding religion in those ways. Do I feel that my religion is the right one, or would it be more fair to characterize it as the right one for you? Jews have never said that Judaism is the only valid religion. We just ask that people don't proselytize and try and convert us. We don't go out and actively proselytize. If someone wants to become Jewish, they go through a period of study. And then they sit before a panel of 3 rabbis who question them. Some of the questioning is about knowledge, but most of it is about their emotional readiness to become part of the Jewish community.
Okay.
The process takes between 1 and 2 years, depending on the person and depending on the rabbi. And once you convert to Judaism, you are treated as if you were born Jewish. There's no distinction made between the convert and the born Jew.
Okay.
Okay. Before I get to COVID, I'd like to talk a little bit about our holidays. Do you have time for that?
I have the whole afternoon.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have a whole afternoon because I've got to get this editing done, but
Okay.
it's one of the non-Jewish things I do to make a living. Hanukkah is a minor holiday. It's not the Jewish Christmas. I really want people to understand that.
Okay.
It's an important holiday in these days because it's a holiday about religious freedom and freedom from oppression. And there's a lot of oppression of religion going on in the world today.
Yeah.
The reason we light the Hanukkah menorah with the 8 candles plus the one one that acts as the lighter, the shamash candle. So you see 9 candles on it. That's a story that was made up in I think the 3rd century when we were living in foreign lands. And it wasn't good to talk about a military victory, which is what the celebration of Hanukkah was. It was a military victory to take back the temple in Jerusalem from the Syrian Greeks who ruled over Jerusalem at that point, to take back it, clean it out, and rededicate it. The word Hanukkah means dedication or rededication. But it was a military victory. It was the first recorded guerrilla war.
Okay.
And it would not be good living as a very small, suspicious minority in a foreign country to celebrate a military victory. So the rabbis made up the story that when they went to light the menorah in the temple, There was only one cruse of oil, and it lasted for 8 days until more purified oil could be gotten. It's a 3rd or 4th century story, but it's the one that people celebrate today. And so I always make sure I teach about the religious freedom aspect of Hanukkah. Having said that, our major holidays, we have 5 major holidays. The most important ones are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which are our holidays in the fall. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and it starts 10 days of repentance, during which we apologize to people and ask their forgiveness. And then on Yom Kippur, which is 10 days later, it's called the Day of Atonement. We apologize for our sins to God. We apologize as a community. We don't say I sinned, we say we sinned, and we list all the ways anybody could have sinned. So everybody's sins are covered without embarrassing anybody.
Oh, okay.
And that's a 25-hour fast, and there are services. All our holidays start at sundown the day before, which is why Christmas has Christmas Eve and New Year's has New Year's Eve. And I'm talking with my hands, which of course you can't see, but Jews do that. Those are our 2 major holidays. I'm just going to ignore the phone if you can ignore it as well.
Oh, that's fine.
Then we have 3 pilgrimage festivals, which are really our biblical holidays.
Okay.
And the most observed of those is the holiday of Passover, which celebrates the Exodus from Egypt. And that's where we have our Passover Seder, a communal meal, usually family meal, but we have a communal Seder in St. Joe. I can't try one from, I'll make this fast. Hey, I'm on a Zoom. Can I call you back? Okay, bye-bye. That was a colleague, so another woman rabbi.
Oh.
A conservative rabbi. So we have Passover, which lasts for 8 days. That's the holiday in which we don't eat bread or anything with leavening in it. Because when we left Egypt, there was not time for the bread to rise. That gets more complicated, but I'm not going to go into it.
Okay.
And then we have the holiday of Shavuot 6 weeks later, which it was a barley festival, harvest festival of barley, and it's been imbued with the religious significance of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, which happens in Exodus 20, chapter 20. And then we have in the fall, we have a final harvest festival, Sukkot, kind of like Thanksgiving, but it's sooner. It starts 5 days after Yom Kippur. And that's where we build little booths that we live in and talk about the fragility of life. We start to pray for rain, hoping that there will be enough rain during the winter for crops. Remember, we're talking about the land of Israel now, which has a different climate than we do. So that crops will grow and we will have a harvest in the spring, and that we will have enough food to make it through the winter. So that's Sukkot. So those are the 3 pilgrimage festivals. They are called pilgrimage festivals because people from throughout the Jewish world in ancient times would come to either walk or on whatever animals they had, would ride to the temple in Jerusalem to make sacrifices for the holiday. And if they lived close in, they would bring animals to sacrifice. If not, they would take the coins from wherever they lived, go to the money changers in the temple, exchange them for the coins of the land of Israel, and use those coins to buy an animal to bring to the priest to sacrifice on their behalf. That's why there were money changers in the temple.
Okay.
So that goes into the whole Easter story, I know. So just putting that in there. There was a purpose for them. Now the prophet Isaiah does say, I don't want all your religious practices and your sacrifices unless you feed the hungry and take care of the needy. All your religious practices are meaningless unless you also do what you're supposed to do and take care of people. So, all right. How has COVID affected our worship services? We're all online. All of us did high holiday services online. Yom Kippur, that meant 6 or more hours of Zoom services. Some people recorded them ahead of time and then streamed them on the holiday. A lot of larger synagogues did that. Some synagogues did them live stream, or just the clergy was in the sanctuary and the services were live streamed to, through Zoom or through Facebook or YouTube or another platform. Because my congregation is small, and we did it actually with my daughter's congregation in Mandeville, Louisiana, just north of New Orleans, because she sings and they don't have a rabbi and we don't have any music people right now. So it was lots of fun to work together with her. So I rabbied and she sang for both congregations.
Oh, that sounds fun.
But the most we had online were 57 screens. And I think it's important to do it on Zoom because I think it's really important for people to see each other and keep up this sense of community.
Okay.
So that's how we're doing it right now. And I'll tell you, it's a lot more work because we did PowerPoints for all of the service, and they're very long services with a lot of fixed prayers. The Reform Rabbis organization, from the one that puts out our prayer books, they made PowerPoints of the high holiday prayer books that we purchased. But it's still, we had to, if we did everything that was on the PowerPoint, the services would have been 4 times as long as,
No.
So it was just gleaning from it what we thought we needed for the essence of the service. It took hours and hours. And I spent like 2 weeks doing that for the services. But
Wow.
it looks like we're going to be doing it again next year. So now we have them,
Yeah.
So, all right. Do you have any other questions?
Well, I guess the one last one I would have here is that, assuming someday people are ever able to meet again in person, would you welcome anybody from the community to just kind of sit in on a service if they could?
Absolutely. And if they come before services, I will talk with them about, take them into the sanctuary, show them the sanctuary, and answer any questions they might have before the service begins.
Okay.
If people want to come online to services, they could just give them my contact information.
Okay.
And I will send the Zoom link to them, just with the understanding that there's no proselytizing of any sort.
Right.
That they're there as guests, and that they may not agree with us, but this is not the place to teach us about Christianity. Most Jews know a lot more about Christianity than Christianity knows about Jews, than Christians know about Jews.
And
When
I
you're
guess,
a minority, you understand the majority religion.
I mean, is that a common problem then, that people will show up and try to explain Jesus to you like you've never heard about him before?
We haven't experienced that, but I also talk to each group about that before they come.
Okay.
There's a group called Jews for Jesus, or Messianic Jews. They're not Jews, they're Christians. You cannot be Jewish and believe in Jesus. They are the most dangerous because they present themselves as Jews who can believe in Jesus. There are very few Jews involved in that group. They are supported financially by the Southern Baptist Leadership Conference.
Okay.
And they come to a lot of our community events. We really put out that, and they are asked to leave if they start to proselytize.
Okay.
They can be very aggressive. And very unpleasant when you tell them to stop.
That is unfortunate.
I haven't had that experience with people who are Christians, who don't pretend to be what they're not.
Right.
I have found we've had several groups come, and we've had students groups come from Benedictine College. We have people come. And I have found them to be very respectful. And I would expect your students would be very respectful as well. I just like to put it out there.
I would certainly hope so.
Yes. But if you, and probably if any of them are going to sit in on a service, you should probably sit in on it as well. Yeah. And then if you have questions about it, we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for your time and taking
You're
some
welcome.
out of your day and to help teach us.
Right. And you can understand how much I love teaching. So